have been appointed as the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism by the United Nations Human Rights Council. What is the mandate of your role?
So when we look at the special procedures, particularly the rapporteurs are mainly independent experts, and this is one of the 56 special procedures that's appointed by the Human Rights Council. So here in my mandate, that specifically focuses on racism, and when we speak of racism, it's more to do with race, color, descent, ethnic origin. So this is a mandate which was started in 1993.
Okay.
And they try to look at how there's a explicit need to focus on rampant racism across the globe in different parts of the world. And in terms of the mandate, I will have to explicitly focus on discrimination or any sort of intolerance against Africans, mostly Africans, and also descendants of Africans or migrants, also Asians who are in Europe and America, and also the community who are also subjected to discrimination owing to their social identity or religious identity. So I'll have to focus on these particular aspects. So generally it focuses on racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and when we say related intolerance, it has a broad scope, and we try to narrow it down to ethnicity or discrimination or exclusion based on social identity.
Okay. Thank you, Ashwini. You will be the first Asian person to helm this important role. As a Dalit woman, you represent an intersectional group that has been marginalized through history because of your caste and gender. What does your appointment mean for the politics of representation?
As as a student activist, and also as someone who has been keen on studying social exclusion in terms of in within my activist space or academic space, I always felt that how representation is extremely important to take a lot of sensitive issues and experiences to places of decision making and policy making, and especially in a global platform like this. For the longest time, we don't see we have rarely seen representation of marginalized communities, particularly from South Asia. And being a Dalit and also a woman, I think it's a huge responsibility for me, and also in terms of looking at how I can take my own personal experience in terms of being a Dalit and being a woman, how gender or caste affects an individual or a community in terms of access to opportunities, education, and many other things. And racism or xenophobia, or all these, caste discrimination, all these are similar to each other. These are all institutionalized forms of discrimination, and I can also very well relate to how it is to be exposed to racism, how it is to be exposed to xenophobic attack, or so the way in which caste has kind of defined our lives, the way in which gender has defined our lives. I mean, despite me coming from educated background and also with certain social capital, that has not spared me from caste discrimination or gender discrimination. In progressive spaces, I have faced discrimination. So I think these experiences will help me to understand race and various other things in a very much nuanced, in a very clear manner, and also representation in terms of as a woman and as a Dalit, representation almost changes the narrative and the way in which issues are addressed, and it is much needed in a global platform like that of United Nations.
Okay, thank you. One of the important roles of the Special Rapporteur is the fact-finding country visits. where you will get a chance to examine in detail allegations of racism, xenophobia, and intolerance in a particular country. Have you identified the countries that you will be visiting and the issues that you will be investigating in these countries?
For now, we've not finalized because also country visits are official. Mostly when we as special rapporteurs, we have to visit a country, we have to get an official invitation from the concerned government,
Okay.
which also gave space for us to officially engage with civil society groups or representatives from the government, and therefore probably we might look into one of the countries either in North America or South America or Europe, one of these continents.
Okay.
And particularly in the recent past, there has been a lot of instances of incarceration of marginalized communities, particularly in Europe and Southern America and Northern America. So we might also focus on that. And in addition to that, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, UN rapporteurs have to also keep in line with the SDGs and take that into consideration when we are looking at our mandate.
Okay.
So it's a mix of a lot of things.
Okay.
But we haven't finalized about the country visit, and I'm sure in the coming days you'll officially get to know
Okay.
the country.
I'll follow that. I'm interested in where you're going and what you're investigating. Perhaps I'll write about it again.
Thank you so much.
The next question is the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which is a convention of the United Nations, defines racial discrimination in very broad terms as any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin, which has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. Does this mean that you will have the mandate to examine issues of atrocities against Dalits in India?
If we look at the Dalit community, particularly marginalized, the untouchable community, now we don't. It's not confined to South Asia alone because Dalits have spread across the globe, and we also see that caste operates very efficiently in the diaspora communities.
Okay.
The previous special rapporteur had made very specific reference to caste, referring to the previous Durban Declaration, where the Dalit community was identified as one of the most marginalized and historically oppressed communities. So, but otherwise, apart from my mandate, there are other mechanisms like the Convention of Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So they are more equipped to address dissent-based discrimination.
Okay.
So we look at Dalit issues within the purview of dissent-based discrimination or dissent and occupation-based discrimination. So of course, I can make reference about the exclusionary practices perpetuated against Dalits. But if we how the mechanisms work, even when you look at the advocacy and lobby that has taken place in the last 3 decades by Dalit activists, academicians, and the progressive circles with regards to caste-based discrimination, the major communication has been with the members of Convention Against Racial Discrimination.
Okay.
So the very mechanism, the way in which the individuals, the third committee members, that the Elimination of Racial Discrimination committee members are more equipped to address this more efficiently, because caste is often seen within the UN platform. Caste is often seen within dissent and occupation-based discrimination.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you. My next question is the plight of Rohingyas, who are the world's largest ethnic community without a state, is extremely worrying. Do you plan on exploring possible solutions to this long-standing crisis during your tenure?
So when we look at Rohingyas also come from the Muslim community, which also makes them further vulnerable. Um, uh, Look at the migrant aspect. I mean, my mandate looks at also takes into consideration the aspect of discrimination faced by migrants, and it's a very complex issue when we look at Rohingyas. And if I have to, I as an mandate holder, if I have to focus on Rohingya issue, it has to be like country specific. I mean, in case if I have to visit. Make a country visit to Myanmar, probably I can highlight the issue of Rohingyas much more effectively. And because, I mean, that's the place where the issue raked up. And also, when we look at the migration, particularly in Europe and many other states, how the Rohingya community migration has affected the community and how displacement, and it has further kind of affected women and children in the community, looking at the intensity and various other things. Of course, I mean, when there is a need, or there are other mechanisms as well at United Nations have been addressing this. And given an opportunity, I would be happy to address this. So most of the times when special procedures or mandate holders take it up, as when the issue reaches at its peak, mostly when they look at the intensity, they look at the civil society involvement and also the state involvement. All of that is taken into consideration, and it's one of the most sensitive matters, and it is worth taking note of.
Yes. Well, I hope you get an opportunity to contribute, to solve this long standing crisis, because those people are in severe distress for many decades now, I think.
Absolutely.
My next question is, what, apart from these things that you've mentioned, what will be some of your main areas of focus during your tenure as Special Rapporteur?
There are also theme-based topics which mandate holders focus on. My previous UN rapporteur on racism focused on climate change. So again, as I told you, SDGs have been one of the most important aspect in line with which many of the mandate holders have been asked to work. And but apart from that, for me as personally as an individual, I think intersectionality, particularly in the context of gender, that interests me a lot. And I'm keen on focusing on how racism, xenophobia, or other related intolerance affects the women within the marginalized communities, the LGBTQI communities. They are further discriminated, further excluded. So often gender is somehow not spoken about or less spoken about. So probably, in terms of education or in terms of political representation or employment or even healthcare. So it is rampant discrimination, and I am very keen to focus on the intersectional aspect of racism or racial discrimination.
That's great. Yeah, I hope you get a chance to do that.
Yeah.
My next question is, the 2000 World Conference Against Racism held in Durban brought an old debate about caste and race to the attention of the world after attempts by Dalit activists to argue that caste discrimination was equivalent to racial discrimination. Since you will be focusing on issues of racial discrimination in your role, I am keen on understanding your own perspective on this perennial debate. The hierarchy of the caste system is an institutionalized form of discrimination. But can we see this as a form of racial discrimination as well?
So when we look at caste and race, I think we have to look at these two aspects as two different aspects of discrimination. But also the aspect of exclusion, the aspect of violence, all of that is very similar to both factors. We cannot say that caste is more worse than race or race is more worse than caste, because we've seen for the longest time, because of racism, an entire race, a certain race, I mean, particularly if we have to look at the African community, have been excluded for centuries, denied opportunities. They've been victims of the most violent tactics used by the privileged communities in Europe or North America and other parts of the country, world. So, but when we look at caste, I mean, for the longest time it was confined to South Asia alone, but now due to transnational migration and various other things, we see caste operating in different parts of the world. But I will not say that caste and race are same, but when we have to address it globally, I think it is also necessary to place both caste and race as the worst forms of discrimination,
Absolutely.
because caste also should be addressed just like how race is addressed. Race has gained a lot of momentum, particularly with anti-Semitism and various other movements across the globe. I think today with academia and activism, there are a lot of people who have been discussing, actively on social media in various platforms about caste, but it was not the same probably 2 or 3 decades ago, how the way in which caste itself was addressed. Today things have changed, especially post-urban conference, the presence of Dalit academia or activist has completely changed the narrative of how caste has been addressed, and caste has been very much acknowledged within United Nations, though there is no convention which mentions the term caste. But however, this is an aspect which has not been completely negated. I would like to mention that specifically, because a lot of conventions and working groups have time and again have expressed their concern about Dalits and violence against Dalits. So academically, if we look at the origin, the function, the impact, the repercussion of caste and race might be different, but in a global platform, I think it is okay to address both at the same platform, not making look one is worse than the other, but then also to make sure that caste is as important as race.
Yeah, very good answer. Yeah, I sort of enjoyed listening to that. It because I've also been confused, and it has often I've sort of engaged with many people who argue quite aggressively that caste and race is the same. But interesting answer that you gave. My next question is, a major part of your academic research as well as professional work has been in the arena of Dalit activism. While Dalit activism has played a major role in addressing instances of caste discrimination, I still don't think it has managed to aggressively spread the ideology, I should change that, ideology of Ambedkarism among Dalits in India. What do you have to say about this?
I think when we look at ideology of Ambedkarism, I think Babasaheb Ambedkar is viewed differently by different people. It's very difficult for us to impose that one has to view Ambedkar in only a certain way. There are individuals who look at him as an intellect. There are individuals who look at Ambedkar as in terms of spirituality, his idea of Buddhism. I know people who look at Ambedkar as a social reformer or as a jurist or as a constitution maker. So the outlook, the perspective in which Ambedkar is looked at, that's how an individual will try to create that opinion or perspective about Ambedkarism. And I think in every state, for example, if you look at Maharashtra, Dalit movement is quite vibrant, and also in Maharashtra, access to information about Ambedkar's life, his family, his work is much more than many other states. If we look at Karnataka and Tamil Nadu has a lot of Dravidian movement influence, and Ambedkar is looked at differently. There are places where there is a combination of left and Ambedkarite movement. So I don't completely agree that there's no impact of Ambedkarism. In fact, if we look at UP, particularly post with the emergence of Kanchiram, there have been organizations like BAMSEF and many other study group kind of an organizations which have extensively worked on educating youngsters about Baba Sahib Ambedkar's writings, and I myself have seen in many of the universities, we have study groups, Ambedkar study groups, who majorly focus on writings of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. So I think the way in which Baba Sahib Ambedkar is understood, it differs from person to person, and I personally feel that it is not necessary that everyone has to have that pure academic theoretical understanding. I think an activist is as important as an academician. An activist who works on field, who directly talks to survivors, victims, and tries to look at policies, limitations within policies, is as important as any other academician who would sit and write a wonderful theory about social exclusion or caste. So I think it's about a multifarious perspective that each and every individual who are conscious about the caste assertion, anti-caste movement, and Ambedkarism, I think it's all about that. I still feel that there are a certain section of people who have to understand Ambedkarite philosophy, particularly in terms of gender. I think this is some that I really want to stress upon, and it's my personal experience that consciously or unconsciously, a large section of people ignore the perspective provided by Baba Sahib Ambedkar about gender. I think that's one of the most progressive theory that he proposed about gender empowerment. When we look at Hindu code, various other things. I think one has to, if I have to say that there's something that has not been taken into consideration by a large section of people. Yes, a certain section of people in academia and activism have taken, but a large section of people somewhere down the line have unconsciously kind of they're not focused much about Ambedkar's idea of gender. I think that's very important at this point of time. Yeah.
Earlier interview, you mentioned that this earlier interview is your Varta Bharati interview. So you mentioned that the life and work of Baba Sahib Ambedkar has been a source of constant inspiration for you. How will you use Ambedkar's ideas in your role as Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism?
Very, very complex question.
Yes.
I think as someone who I have idealized Baba Sahib Ambedkar, and since childhood I've been I've been taught about Baba Sahib Ambedkar within my personal space and outside, and a lot of discussions about Ambedkar, and it's really a difficult task to be an Ambedkarite, because there are, the kind of aspects related to equality, the aspects related to fraternity. When we look at the preamble itself, it's so beautiful. It might look idealistic, then I think it has these aspects have brought in immense change in lives of Dalits and other marginalized communities post-independent India, and we get to see, maybe it's not the way we had expected, but to a large section, to a large extent, we see that marginalized communities have managed to get education, employment, and have occupied the highest constitutional position. And I think when it comes to Baba Sahib Ambedkar, the idea of equality, I think the idea of the idea of fraternity, the idea of making sure that no one is mistreated or discriminated. I think these things which every state, every institution should incorporate genuinely. I think these are things which are often seen as extremely idealistic, not realistic, but with time, I think we also have to focus on time, because these are forms of discrimination, be it race and caste and various other things, have been for centuries together, and just mere regulations or a set of laws will not change the mindset of individuals. But I feel that as a source of inspiration, I think everything that Ambedkar has said, I think that will kind of the most important is the idea of equality, and to also make sure that maybe through my intervention, maybe one community might benefit, one community might be kind of, I can safeguard or protect them from violence, or
In some part
any
of the
kind of
world.
repercussion.
In some
Yeah,
part of the world.
I'm not saying that I would change the entire world, but obviously a small community, maybe somewhere in Norway, might benefit from my intervention. I think the small step, even a baby step, would make a large difference. And I think with time, people will also, change their mindset, and it's also about that progressive unlearning. I think for me, it's also about learning and unlearning in terms of Baba Saheb's philosophy. I think there are many things which I take from Baba Saheb, but the most important is, like to make sure that the aspect of equality and mostly the aspect of fraternity and justice particularly would be addressed in a more efficient way, which would benefit few marginalized communities.
So his ideas in some way are universal, and this is what you will
Yeah.
be taking. This is what perhaps in your role somewhere this will become valuable.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yes,
Hopefully.
hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay.